Hi guys, welcome to Algebra 1. Today's lesson is going to focus on factoring trinomials when your leading coefficient is not 1. Now what you know about factoring trinomials with a leading coefficient of 1 is going to help you get through these types of problems. You ready? Let's go. Okay, so to jog your memory, let's first think back about how you would factor this trinomial, for example. So okay, you probably start out by setting up what the answer is going to look like with your sets of parentheses, and then you know that you're going to have some x's out front like that. Then you need the factors of 6. All right, so I know 1 times 6 will give me 6, and so will 2 times 3. And I need the pair of factors that in this case will combine to give me 5. So 1 and 6, when I combine those, I get 7. So that's not the pair. 2 and 3, when I combine those, I get 5. So that is the pair that I want. So I'd say, all right, my factors are x plus 2 and x plus 3. Here we factored a trinomial that had a leading coefficient of 1. There's an invisible 1 there for that first term. But what happens when you have something like this? When you have a trinomial and the leading coefficient is not 1? To handle these types of problems, there's a few steps I want to tell you first. Then we're going to jump back and do that problem. All right, there's a few. Like I said, there's 5. The first thing you have to remember, if you look at the top of this, is your trinomial is written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. Because the first step is multiplying the a and the c. Then we're going to figure out the factors of that product that will add up to give us b, that middle number, kind of like you were doing before. Then we're going to do something that's called splitting the middle term. I'll show you what I mean by that. Then we're going to factor our 2 binomials in our work, and then we'll be at the point where we've got our answer. Okay? So keep these steps kind of written on a sheet of paper to the side so you can follow along while we go ahead and factor this trinomial. Okay. So the first thing I do is I know, all right, this trinomial is written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So you need to first factor the a and the c, or like the first number and the last number. You can think about it like that. You need to multiply those together. I'm sorry. So 3 times 8, that's 24, right? So I found the product of a and c. So now what I need to do is figure out what factors of 24 would also combine and give me 10. Okay, so this step we've handled before as far as, listing our factors and figuring out the right sum that we need. It's just that in this problem, there's an extra step of multiplying that a and that c together to start with. Okay, so now that we've got 24, let's list our factors. So 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. All of those pairs will give you 12. I'm sorry, will give you 24 when you're multiplying. Now I need to figure out which pair of factors would give me a sum of 10. Okay, so let's just start testing these out. Combining 1 and 24, that's 25. 2 and 12, that's 14. 3 and 8, that's 11. 4 and 6, that is 10, right? So these 3 didn't work, but the 4 and the 6 did work. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring this off to the side a bit. Let's erase this. Okay. I'm at the point now where I split the middle term. So what that means is that instead of writing, this is my middle term, that 10x, I'm going to split it. So instead of writing 10x, I'm going to write it as a sum of 2 other terms. I'm going to split it into 2 terms. So I'll still have the 3x squared. But instead of writing 10x, I'm going to write 4x plus 6x, going back over here to our factors. Because 4 and 6 I know will add to give me 10. So 4x plus 6x adds to give me 10x. You're not changing the meaning of the problem at all. You're just representing that 10x in a different way, not 64x, because that would change the meaning of your problem. It's 6x. There we go, plus 8. okay? So like I said, 10x, we're just representing it as 4x plus 6x, because that is still 10x. We're just doing this to help us get through this problem. All right, let me get this out of our way. So now what we do is we look at this like it's two different binomials. Like we have this first group right here, and then we have the second group right here. And we're going to factor this first group, and then we're going to factor the second group. So you remember when we factored binomials, we were looking for our greatest common factor, right? So between 3x squared and 4x, well, first just consider your 3 and your 4. There's no factors that 3 and 4 have in common except 1, right? So I can just keep that in my mind. Now, x squared and x, you may need to see this written out. It may actually help. Let's go ahead and write the work off to the side. Then we may get to the point we don't need to write it. Okay, so factoring that 3, 1 and 3, I know, right? It's prime, so that's it for 3. And then factoring x squared, you know, you have x and x, right? And that's it for 3x squared. Now factoring 4x, I know 1 times 4 would give me 4, and so would 2 times 2. And then I do have one factor of x that I can write. So when I'm saying, okay, I need the greatest common factor, in this case, all they have in common is a 1. That doesn't change anything really, and the x. So I'm going to say, all right, the greatest common factor of those two terms is x. So I'll write my x, then I'll open up my parentheses, and then I need to divide each of those terms by x. Okay, so 3x squared divided by x. All right, so that's like an invisible 1 I don't see. So that's like 3 divided by 1, which is 3. And then x squared divided by x to the first. So subtracting your exponents, that's just x to the first. So I know right in here, I'd have a 3x. Let me go ahead and write that plus. Now I need to divide 4x by x. Okay, so 4x divided by x, we're like a 1x. 4 divided by 1, that's just 4. X to the first divided by x to the first. Subtracting those exponents, that's x to the 0. And anything to the 0 power is just 1. So this really is just like 4 times 1, which is just 4. So that means the second group, or the second spot right here, it'd have a 4. We do the same process with that 6x plus 8. Okay, let's get this work out of our way. So we need to find the greatest common factor between 6x and 8. So we have a 6x, we have an 8. Okay, so as far as the 6 is concerned, I know 1 times 6 would work, and so would 2 times 3. And then I have a factor of x, right? As far as my 8's concerned, I know 1 times 8 would work, and so would 2 times 4. So in this case, my greatest common factor is 2. So greatest common factor is 2. Oops, slid that down by accident. Okay, so what I would write here now is plus 2, because that's the greatest common factor for the second group right here. Open up my parentheses. Go ahead and throw that plus sign in there. Now I'm going to divide each of these terms by the greatest common factor. I'm just ignoring this work over here for a minute. Okay, so 6x divided by 2. All right, 6 divided by 2, that's 3. I have an x up top but nothing on the bottom, so it's just carrying along for the ride. So I've got 3x for the first term. And now I need to divide 8 by 2. Well, 8 divided by 2, that's 4. Then you see in your second spot, you have a 4. And then you look. You have the same binomial in your parentheses. So that itself is like a common factor of this trinomial you were trying to factor to start with. So to write your final answer, this is exactly what you do. You see you have that x that was the greatest common factor and this 2 that was the greatest common factor. when we factored those groups, you bring them together. So you'd have x plus 2 as one factor, and then that 3x plus 4 that's common to both. That's another factor. And you are all done. You have factored that trinomial that had a leading coefficient that was not 1. Now I know there's a lot to this problem, so these type of problems, we definitely have to do a few so you can get the hang of it. Okay? Let's try another one. All right, so now I'm factoring 3x squared plus 7x plus 2. So you remember the first step, you multiply the a and the c, or in this case, the 3 and the 2. So 3 times 2, I know that's 6. So now I need factors of 6 that are going to combine to give me 7. Okay? So I start listing. 1 times 6, 2 times 3. I need a positive 7. Okay? So 1 and 6, that's 7. You got it. It's that first pair. So you remember this is the point where we would split that middle term. So I'm going to rewrite this trinomial as 3x squared plus x plus 6x plus 2. I'm splitting that 7x into 1x plus 6x. It doesn't change the meaning at all. It just helps me be able to factor this trinomial a little better. Okay? So now that I've split the middle term, I'm at the point now where I need to factor these two groups, these two pairs of monomials. I'm going to get this work out of our way. Okay, so let's consider this first group and then the second group. Okay, so let's see how we're doing with finding greatest common factors here. So between these two terms, the greatest common factor, I see the coefficient of this one's 3. Coefficient of this one is 1. So as far as my numbers are concerned, the greatest number they have in common as a factor is 1. Now I see I have x squared and I have x. So if this term has 2 x's and this term has 1x, then they both have at least 1x in common. So the greatest common factor of these two terms is just 1x. I'm going to open up the parentheses, and now it's time to divide each of these terms by x. So I'll come off over here. So 3x squared divided by x, which is like a 1x really to the first, because we don't see that exponent. So 3 divided by 1, that's 3. X squared divided by x to the first, that's just x, because we subtract our exponents here. So for my first term in here, I know I have a 3x. It's going to be a plus, so go ahead and get that in there. And then for the second term, I need to divide x by x. Well, x divided by x, that's just 1. So that means I have a 1 in here for that second group of parentheses, or that second term in the parentheses. Okay? So now it's time to do the same thing with 6x plus 2. Okay? So let me get this work out of our way. Alrighty. And I need the greatest common factor between 6x and 2. So I already see that that's just a 2. It's a constant term. So I know they're not going to have any x's in common. I need to focus my attention on these numbers here. So as far as 6 goes and 2 goes, well, 2 is prime. So the only factors for 2 are 1 and 2. And 2 is also a factor of 6. So between these two terms, my greatest common factor is going to be 2. So I'm going to write plus 2. Go ahead and open my parentheses. I know that I'm going to have a plus sign in between. Okay. So now it's time to divide each of these terms by our greatest common factor over here. So 6x divided by 2. Okay, so 6 divided by 2, that's 3. And this x is just hanging along for the ride. So 3x. And then I have 2 divided by 2, which is 1. Okay, so then you look. We're at that point where you notice you have the same group in those parentheses. So we're at the point now we can rewrite this. So right here we have our x plus 2, which is out front. We bring that together. So x plus 2. And then that factor that was repeated, 3x plus 1. And you are all done. You have factored that trinomial. Okay? So there are a few steps to it, but once you do it a few times, you start to get the hang of it. Okay? Let's try some more. So factor completely. 2x squared plus 5x plus 3. So again, we need to start out by multiplying 2 times 3. 6 just keeps popping up here. So 2 times 3 is 6. So factors of 6, 1 and 6, 2 and 3. So now we need the factors of 6 that are going to combine to give us 5. Okay? So let's see what we got here. 1 and 6, that's 7. 2 and 3, that is 5. So I'm going to split this middle term and rewrite this as 2x squared plus 2x plus 3x plus 3. Okay? Now, do you remember what we do next? We're at the point where we take this first group, we take the second group, and we start factoring each group. We pull out the greatest common factor in each group. Let's get this work out of the way. All right. So 2x squared and 2x. Well, it's clear to see they both have that 2 in common. The first term has x squared, so there's a product of 2 x's with that one. Then the second term is 2x, so it just has 1x for that one. So for the numbers, 2 was the greatest common factor. For the variables, x was the greatest common factor. So my greatest common factor, 2x. I'll open up my parentheses. I know I have a plus in between. Okay, so now I'm going to divide each of these terms by that greatest common factor. So 2x squared divided by 2x. Okay, so 2 divided by 2, that's 1. X squared divided by x to the first, that's x. So basically it's x. When I divide over there, I get x. And then I have 2x divided by 2x. Well, anything divided by itself is 1. So we know that 2x divided by 2x is 1. Okay, so we've handled that first set. Let's go on to this next group, this 3x plus 3. Let me get this work out of the way. Alrighty. Okay, so 3x and a 3. Well, I see they both have 3. There's a 3 involved in each of these terms. So I know as far as my number is concerned, the greatest common factor is 3. Now, the first term has an x, the second term doesn't, so they don't have an x in common. The only thing they have in common is a 3. So I'm going to write my greatest common factor, 3, for this group. I'm going to open up my parentheses, go ahead and put the plus inside, and start dividing. So 3x divided by 3. All right, well, 3 divided by 3, I know that's 1. X on top and no x on the bottom, so that just carries along for the ride. So I have basically 1x, or just x. And then now, 3 divided by 3, that's 1. So you got a 1. All right, so remember what we do next? We're at the point now where we just clean it up and write our final answer. So we've got the 2x out front here, the 3 out front here. So in one set of parentheses, you'd have 2x plus 3. And then you'd have that factor that was in both of those, the one that was repeated. That x plus 1. And you are all done. You factored completely. Okay? Let's try another. Okay. So this one's involving some negatives, so that's going to be a little different. But other than that, the process is exactly the same. Start out by multiplying a and c. So 4 times 3, that's 12. And I know I need factors of 12 that are going to combine to give me negative 1. So I know that once I list these factors, they're going to have different signs. One of the numbers is going to have to be positive, and the other is going to have to be negative. If when I combine them, I get negative 1. So first, let's list the factors. 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4, right? So now we have to figure out which one of these pairs of numbers will work and which one of them should be negative. Well, we know we're trying to get negative ones. You can kind of throw the first pair out the window pretty quickly. There's no way you can combine a 1 and a 12 and get negative 1, no matter which of those numbers were negative. If it were negative 1 plus 12, it'd be 11. And if it were 1 plus negative 12, it'd be negative 11. So there's no way it's the first pair. 2 and 6, well, if the 2 were negative, it'd be negative 2 plus 6, and that's 4. If the 6 were negative, then it'd be a negative 4, so that's not it. So it has to be this last pair. I just have to figure out which one of those numbers needs the negative. All right, if it's a negative 3 plus 4, it's a positive 1, and I needed a negative 1, so that means that it's the 4 that's negative. 3 plus negative 4 will give me negative 1. So now I'm ready to go ahead and split my middle term. So I'm going to rewrite it as, well, I've got my 4x squared. I'm going to write plus 3x minus 4x minus 3. Okay. Do you remember what comes next? You go ahead, you take your groups, and you start factoring the pairs. Okay. Let's get some more room to work up here. All right. So if I look at these first terms, the 4x squared and the 3x, 4 and 3 have nothing in common but 1. But I do see I have an x squared and I have an x. So these terms at least each have an x as a factor. So that means I'm going to write x as the greatest common factor. Okay. And let's get the parentheses up. Let's go ahead and get the plus sign in there. So 4x squared divided by x. Because now I'm ready to start dividing these terms by my greatest common factor. So that's essentially a 1x to the first over there. So 4 divided by 1, that's 4. X squared divided by x, that's just x. So now I have 4x over here. And then 3x divided by x. So 3x to the first divided by 1x to the first. Okay. So 3 divided by 1, that's just 3. X to the first divided by x to the first, you'd get x to the 0 power, which is just 1. So basically 3 times 1, that's not changing anything. So I'll just leave it as 3. Bring it over here. Okay, so now I'm at the point to go ahead and look at these factors. Now, I have a negative 4x and I have a negative 3. The only thing these two terms have in common is a negative 1. That's it. Both of these terms are negative. We already knew that 3 and 4 didn't have any factors in common. And this is the only term that has the x over here. So the only thing they have in common is a negative 1. That's it. So now it's time to go through. Let's go ahead and get that in there. And let's get this work out of the way. Here we go. Okay. Now, I'm not going to write this sign in here just yet because I want to show you something over here. Left something out. There we go. Okay. So now I have negative 4x divided by negative 1. So negative 4x divided by negative 1. Negative 4 divided by negative 1 is just 4. X on top, but no x on the bottom, so it just carries along for the ride. So I get 4x over here. And then I have a negative 3 divided by a negative 1. So negative 3 divided by negative 1, that's positive 3. So plus 3. Okay? Remember what comes next? You're at the finish line, just about. It's time to just write that final answer. So I see I have the x out front here and the negative 1 out front here. So x minus 1. And both of these have the 4x plus 3. So 4x plus 3. And you're all done. And exactly like we saw when we were factoring trinomials where the leading coefficient was 1, you can still check your answer by just multiplying your factors out. So when you get to the last step and you write your factors, if you want to check your answer, multiply your factors together. Just use FOIL and multiply them together. And then make sure you get the problem that we started with. You can still check your answers that way. Okay? Let's continue. Got one more here. All right. So you remember the first step? Good. Multiply A and C together. So 2 times 15, because I'm going to ignore the sign for a second, is 30. So I'm going to factor 30. So 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, and 5 times 6. And that's it for 30. So I need the factors that are going to combine to give me a positive 1. And remember, if you consider the sign now, this was really a positive 2 times a negative 30. So that means that, go ahead and put the negative in there, because now we're going to consider the signs. If the product is negative, that means that I had to multiply together a positive number with a negative number. So we just need to go through here and check and see which pair is going to work, where one number is positive and one number is negative, and the answer is 1, okay, for that middle term. So let's see. Well, we know there's no way we can combine 1 and 30 and the answer be negative 1. I'm sorry, the answer be positive 1. There's no way. If the 1 were negative, it'd be 29. And if the 30 were negative, it'd be negative 29. So we know that's not it. 2 and 15, if the 2 were negative, the answer would be 13. And if the 15 were negative, the answer would be negative 13. So that's not it. 3 and 10, if the 3 were negative, it'd be 7. If the 10 were negative, it'd be negative 7. So nope. Okay, so here, we know it has to be this pair, but which one's negative? Well, if the 5's negative, negative 5 plus 6, that is positive 1. So that's the pair that we want, the negative 5 and the positive 6. So let's go ahead, let's split our middle term. So we're going to rewrite this as 2x squared minus 5x plus 6x minus 15, okay, because we didn't change the meaning at all. We're just rewriting that 1x as negative 5x plus 6x, okay. Let's get this work out of the way, because now it is time to take these two groups and start looking at these separately to get the greatest common factors. So if I consider 2x squared and 5x, 2 and 5 are both prime numbers. So the only factor they're going to have in common is 1. But as far as the variable part goes, x squared and an x, they both have at least one factor of x. So the greatest common factor between these two terms is x. Go ahead and open up my parentheses. I'll start dividing here. And I'm going to go ahead and write my minus in this time. Okay, so 2x squared divided by x. 2x squared divided by x. There's a 1 and 1 I don't see. So this will end up being 2 divided by 1 is 2. X squared divided by x is x. So 2x for the first term. And then now I've already written my negative down over here, but just to show you why I did, it's because I'm dividing negative 5 by x. And I just already knew the answer was going to be negative, dividing a negative and a positive. Okay, so go ahead and put the invisible ones in. Negative 5 divided by 1 is negative 5. And x divided by x is 1. So basically my answer is negative 5. And I already wrote the negative part, so I'll just drop the 5 in there. Okay? Repeat the same process with that second group. Get that out of the way. Okay. So 6x and 15. Excuse me. You may need to write the factors down for this one. It may not be as clear what it is at first. Okay, so for 6, you have 1 and 6, 2 and 3. You have an x in there, so there's a factor of x. And for 15, 1 and 15, 3 and 5. And now you can look and see, the 15 doesn't have an x, so there's no factor of x in that one. So my greatest common factor here is 3. So I'll come back to my problem. I'll put my 3 in there. All right, I'll go ahead and put the minus sign in there this time, because I know, like I did over here, I knew the answer is going to be a negative in there. All right, so now let's start dividing. Let's get this work out of the way here, get some more room. Okay, so 6x divided by 3. That's 2x, right? 6 divided by 3 is 2. And I have an x up top but nothing on the bottom, so it just carries along for the ride. And then I have negative 15 divided by 3, which is negative 5. And I already wrote the negative part in there because I just thought ahead. I knew it was going to be negative. So there's my 5. Okay. So you remember what's next? You're at the point to just write that final answer. So you look and see which terms were out front. You've got the x and the 3. So x plus 3. And then in my parentheses, I have 2x minus 5 and 2x minus 5. So that means that's that second factor here, 2x minus 5. And you are all done. So that initial trinomial that we started with factors to x plus 3 times 2x minus 5. Okay? All right, you're at the point to try a couple of these on your own. So go ahead and take some time, remember those steps, and work your way through these. And remember, you can check your answer before you press play again. All right? But go ahead and press pause and see how you do. And when you want to compare with me, press play. All right, you ready to check? Let's see. So when I factored that first trinomial, I got 5x plus 1 and x plus 2. And when I factored the second one, I got 3x minus 1 and x minus 4. Okay? This is how I did it. So first thing, remember, we're following our steps. We multiply the a and the c. So 5 times 2, that's 10. Okay? So now I need factors of 10. And in my mind, I know that I'm going to need to find the pair of factors that when I combine them, I get 11. So as far as 10 goes, I know 1 times 10 will give me 10. So will 2 times 5. Okay. Now I need the pair that's going to give me 11. You probably spotted that pretty quickly. It's the 1 and 10. So 1 plus 10 is 11. So you know that's the pair of factors that you want. So now you can jump back to your trinomial, and you're ready to go ahead and split that middle term. So 5x squared plus x plus 10x plus 2. Now you're at the point to take it in groups, and we're going to find the greatest common factor in each group. So as far as 5x squared and 5 goes, the only factor they have in common is x. So if I go ahead and do my division like I need to, all right, so 5x squared divided by x, which is basically a 1x to the first, right? 5 divided by 1, that's 5. X squared divided by x to the first, that's x. So I knew I had 5x right here. Let's close that off, put my plus sign in there. Okay, so now I need x divided by x. Well, anything divided by itself is 1. So that's how I knew that the second term in there was 1. All righty? So let's get that work out of the way. Do that second group. Okay. So between 10x and 2, well, 2 is prime. So the only factors are 1 in itself, 1 and 2. It doesn't have an x. So that means the greatest common factor between 10x and 2 is 2. So I'll go ahead and write my plus 2. Open up my parentheses, and I'm going to have a plus sign in between. Now I'm ready to go ahead and divide to see what actually goes in this group of parentheses. So 10x divided by 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. X on top and nothing on the bottom. Boop. Moving the screen here. Let's get that crazy mark out of the way. There we go. Okay. So 10x divided by 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. X up top but nothing on the bottom. So we're just carrying that along. Okay. So in my group, the first term is 5x. Now I need to divide 2 by 2. So 2 divided by 2. That's 1. and you've got your 5x plus 1. You probably started to notice that when you're working through these problems, if you get to the point where you don't have the same thing in the parentheses, then just go back up and check because something went wrong. Because with these kind of problems, you should end up at the point where you have that same group inside your parentheses, okay? That's a little hint while you're working. Okay, so now you're at the point, just bring everything together. So you've got your x, and you've got that 2 out front. So x plus 2. And then I have my 5x plus 1. And you're all done. Now, if you wrote these in another order, like if you wrote the 5x plus 1 first and the x plus 2 second, that's fine, because you can multiply in any order that you want. Commutative property says you can do that. So if your factors are reversed from mine, you're still right. Okay? Let me show you how I got that last one. Same process. Multiply the a and the c. So 3 times 4, that's 12. So I need my factors for 12. So 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. Okay, so I ignored the signs to start with. And when everything's positive, you can kind of ignore the signs all along the way because all the signs will be positive. It's whenever you've got a negative in there that you want to kind of, okay, something else is going to happen. So you could ignore them to start, but then you've got to consider that it's negative as you start to work your way through the problem, which is where I'm at the point now where I have to consider that this middle term is negative. So if I'm multiplying to get a positive number, because I know that that's positive, even though it's the 4, and I know I'm to work my way through this problem, it's 12, it's still positive. That sign is still the same. And the middle term is negative. So the only way I can multiply two numbers together and get something positive, but combine them and get something negative, is if the numbers themselves are both negative. So I need to consider the fact that these are negative numbers. And then I need to find the pair that's going to give me negative 13. Okay? So negative 1 plus negative 12 is negative 13. What do you know was the first one? Okay? So that's the pair that we need. So now we're at the point where we can go back to our problem and split that middle term. So 3x squared minus x minus 12x plus 4. Okay. I'm going to get that old work out of the way because I know more is coming. All right. Do you remember what we do now? Break it up into those groups. Okay. So I've got 3x squared minus x. So between these two terms, your greatest common factor is just x. So divide each of these terms by x. So 3x squared divided by x, which is basically a 1x to the first, right? So 3 divided by 1, that's 3. X squared divided by x is x. As I know over here, I've got my 3x. Okay. I'm not going to write the minus yet. I'm going to bring it over here with me, and then I'll put it in there with my answer. So I'm dividing negative x by positive x. So basically a negative 1x to the first divided by a positive 1x to the first. Okay? Negative 1 divided by positive 1 is negative 1. X to the first divided by x to the first, that's x to the 0, which is really 1, which doesn't change anything. If I multiply negative 1 times 1, it's still negative 1. So I'll just leave that, bring it over here. Got my minus 1. Okay. So now I'm at the point where I can handle the second group. So let's get this old work out of the way. Okay. So now I see I have a negative 12x and a positive 4. So I need to find out what's the greatest common factor between these two terms. Okay. Because this is negative, I'm going to go ahead and pull that out front. Okay. So I'm going to pull a negative common factor out of each of these. This is what I mean. I know as far as 12 goes, I've got 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. And as far as 4 goes, I've got 1 and, I keep sliding that down. As far as 4 goes, I've got 1 and 4, 2 and 2. So the greatest common factor between these numbers is 4. But I could say that it's -4, okay? Because if I treat this like it's a -12, which basically it is, then I could say, all right, I already know that 4 is going to be my common factor, so I'm just going to jump down to 3 and 4. Then I can say, all right, well, that's the same as 3 times -4. That'd give me -12. And -1 times -4 is also +4. So I'm going to pull out a -4 over here for my greatest common factor. Okay, a little math magic. All right, so now I'll bring these here. And now it's time to divide. You need to divide each of those terms by that -4. Let's get this work out of the way. Okay, so I have -12x divided by -4, which, 12x. So -12 divided by -4, that's 3. X up top, but nothing on the bottom, so it just carries along for the ride. So you see you've got your 3x, right? Then I have +4 divided by -4. +4 divided by -4 is -1. So you see we have our -1. Now we're at the last step to go ahead and write the final answer. So I'll bring these together in a group of parentheses. I'd have x minus 4. And then for my second set, 3x minus 1. That factor that was in both of those. Then remember, you can always multiply these factors together to check and make sure you got the right answer. Make sure you get that trinomial we started with. All right, guys. Well, I hope you're feeling confident about factoring trinomials where your leading coefficient's not 1. And I hope that knowing how to factor trinomials where your leading coefficient is 1 helped you get through this lesson. Hope to see you back here soon. Bye.